Now, to give us more insights in terms of what Russia is trying to achieve with this attack on Ukraine and what are the Russian objectives in this war, we're joined in by Professor John Blaxland. He's joining us from the Australian National University. Professor Blaxland, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on WION. And let me begin by asking you this. For the last several weeks, we've been talking about the diplomatic efforts to try and somehow create a deterrence against Russia carrying out an incursion into Ukraine. The diplomatic efforts clearly seem to have failed, and what we are witnessing is a full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia. What is Russia trying to achieve here?
Yeah, thank you for having me with you. Good to be with you tonight, and thank you for the question. What Russia is trying to achieve has been the million-dollar question, and it is evident now that it was more than NATO, the West, and Ukraine was prepared to offer. Ukraine has made concessions. It's sought to be accommodating, but Russia has become increasingly assertive, adversarial, and now physically belligerent in its attempt to subdue Ukraine, take away Ukraine's freedom of action, its independence, its political freedom, its rights and its privileges. It wants to reassert Russian central Moscow control over what used to be part of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And we thought that perhaps the de facto recognition that NATO was not going to extend its coverage of Ukraine might have been sufficient, but Vladimir Putin clearly wants more than that. And the concern here, particularly in the other Eastern European countries today, is that if Vladimir Putin gets what he wants in Ukraine, it will embolden him to seek more, to seek the winding back of NATO and the conquest, if you like, directly or indirectly, of the former Warsaw Pact countries that happily abandoned the Warsaw Pact and desperately sought to join NATO back in the 1990s. And if that were to happen, this would potentially be calamitous. Essentially, this is about changing the international order that we have established and accepted for the last 80 years. The problem here is that the United States, which is the lead country, that is the leader of the NATO alliance, the one that Ukraine is looking to the most. The United States, of course, has its reputation sullied by the experience in Iraq in 2003. But most are now willing to forgive, to a certain extent, American foibles because of the stakes today. Right. And the stakes are high.
You know, in terms of the American reluctance to, in fact, get involved in creating a deterrence against the Russians, America has said that they are willing to impose financial costs on Russia to prevent it from carrying out an incursion, but that has clearly not worked unless there is more support that the United States is willing to, in fact, put forth, either through sending weapons to Ukraine or by other means. It is difficult to see as to how Russia could be stopped in Ukraine.
Yes, it's interesting because the political will has not been there up until this juncture, but this invasion, I think, is crystallizing the resolve of the West. Olaf Scholz's remarks, the remarks in Britain and other parts of Europe are all very strongly critical of Vladimir Putin's actions, and they are strongly indicating a fresh resolve amongst the G7, amongst NATO countries, for collective action, for coordinated action, and this is what is really required. Coordinated, collective action using Magnitsky Act type legislation provisions targeting Vladimir Putin and his oligarchs and his inner circle where it hurts, with a view to send a very clear message back to Russia that this is unacceptable behaviour. In the meantime, there is additional support that can be provided to Ukraine through humanitarian assistance and through the provision of other supplies. The cyber support is significant as well, and the support for those people who might be seeking to flee right now This is, I think, a emerging humanitarian crisis for which we all should be exercising considerable compassion. But there is a real question here about the so what. What happens next? And this is where it appears that China has basically turned a blind eye and made concessions, at least to the UN, not making any criticism of Russia's actions and being prepared for Russia to proceed with its actions. And this has clearly got ramifications for how China relates to its Asian neighbours. And of course, that includes not just India, but also Taiwan, Japan, Korea, and the Southeast Asian countries and others like my own in Australia. There's significant implications here. If this principle of accepting Putin's claim that Ukraine is not a country, that it has no rights, and that he has the right to simply roll his tanks into Ukraine unchallenged, if this is allowed to stand, this sends a very powerful signal across to China. And it's this for this reason. I mean, I appreciate for India, this is a bit of a conundrum. Russia has been a friend to India for a long time, but Russia's actions right now, I would contend, are contrary to India's interests as well as other Western interests. This is about sending a grave signal for China about line of actual control, about Taiwan, about the South China Sea, about any other territorial claims it wishes to make, wherever it wishes to do so. And this is a grave undermining of the order upon which much of the post-Second World War prosperity has been built. And we need to be mindful that when you take the rules away, when you take the floor away, there is no telling how deep you will fall. And the hole could be very deep, mindful that there are many nuclear powers involved here.
Absolutely, indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Blaxland, for joining us from Canberra and getting us all those insights. This is indeed, it appears, the beginning of a conflict that diplomacy so far has not been successful in halting. How far will the Russians, of course, proceed with this aggression is something that we will continue to track.